This entire program is expected to be about 90 minutes. The first part will be the presentations and then a question and answer session after that. So thanks to everyone joining this evening. This is expected to be an informational meeting regarding the growing deer population in the North Hills. Tonight's program was organized by the town of McCandless in conjunction with Northland Public Library and the McCandless Environmental Advisory Committee. But this topic affects every community in the North Hills. If our goal this evening is achieved, you should leave with a clearer understanding of the issues surrounding the growing deer population in our communities. In early 2020, McCandless began investigating what to do about the growing deer population in the town of McCandless and in the surrounding communities. Was it really a problem? Could anything be done? McCandless Town Council authorized the creation of an ad hoc committee to investigate and address the issue. Following a similar effort by Ross Township in 2020 and Franklin Park prior to that, McCandless started its own effort last spring by including a resident survey in its own publication, the Town Crier, to measure the residents' awareness of the growing deer population. Results from 868 households, 1 in 14, and a very positive response, indicated that a robust 81% of the McCandless households, 81%, thought there was a problem and would consider a comprehensive deer management program. Accordingly, the effort to develop a program was begun. This evening, we are taking yet another step in that process to learn from experts on the issues and to hear comments from the residents. Overall community awareness is critical in developing a solution to this issue. Ross Township, Franklin Park, North Park have already initiated deer management programs of their own. Since any solution impacts all communities in the North Hills, not just McCandless, all input is welcome. Later this spring or early summer, after considering input from all the constituent groups, a policy document will be presented to McCandless Town Council, outlining the goals, objectives, and procedures of a deer management program. And if it is approved, it will be implemented this fall. A successful deer management program is designed to intelligently address the deer population issue. The objective is not to eliminate the deer, but rather to restrict the growth of the herd to keep it at a manageable level. Left unchecked, the local deer population has and will continue to double every 2 to 3 years. I'm going to repeat that. The deer population left unchecked doubles every 2 to 3 years. Ross Township, Franklin Park, and North Park have already partnered with professional organizations to mitigate their deer populations. Property damage in the form of residential landscaping and damage from vehicular crashes, health issues and disease linked to the deer population, and the negative impact browsing deer have on our natural ecosystems are some of the concerns raised by McCandless residents in that survey I referenced last spring. Those are all reasons that we took to pursue this effort. Our 3 speakers tonight will address these and other concerns. We certainly thank them for their participation. Our 3 presentations this evening are from Jeannine Fleegle, Ken Allshouse, and a combined presentation by Madison Kyle and Zeb Campbell. Before each begins, I will give you a little more information on their backgrounds. And I think we are going to be beginning here in 1 second. I want to remind everybody to put their questions in the chat. And if you do not get your question answered or haven't thought of your question in time, but think of something later, you can submit questions to EAC, I will repeat this at the end, but EAC at townofmccandless.org. EAC, which stands for the Environmental Advisory Committee, but it's the letters EAC at townofmccandless.org. So I'll introduce our first speaker tonight. And our first speaker is Jeannine Fleegle. Janine Fleigle has over 20 years of experience working with whitetail deer in 3 states. We are lucky to have her in Pennsylvania since 2004, when she joined the PA Game Commission Deer and Elk Section. Ms. Fleegle is a certified wildlife biologist through the Wildlife Society. Janine has a bachelor's degree in environmental science from the University of New England and a master's degree in fisheries and wildlife science from North Carolina State University. Prior to joining the Game Commission, she was a natural resource specialist for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, where she managed the state chronic wasting disease surveillance program. As part of the deer and elk section here in Pennsylvania, Ms. Fleegle is responsible for outreach and communication on a variety of topics related to white-tailed deer. Her duties include urban deer management, assisting the management of chronic wasting disease, and development of annual deer population assessments and antlerless allocation recommendations. Her topic tonight is deer in your community, pleasure or pest. With that, I will turn it over to Janine. If you're ready to take it, Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate the introduction. And I have a little PowerPoint, and hopefully I'll be able to share my screen. I think Katie will have to give me permission to do that. There we go. Hold on one moment. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my slides. As Dan said, the title of my presentation is Deer in Your Community, Pleasure or Pest. I think we can all relate to that. Deer are wonderful to see until they start causing you a problem. So that's what I'm going to get into. I don't know if everybody knows this, but white-tailed deer are in fact Pennsylvania's state animal, and they are probably our most successful conservation story. Back at the turn of the last century, 1900 or so, deer were pretty much removed or almost extirpated from the landscape of Pennsylvania, which is hard to believe, I know. But it is what prompted the formation of the Game Commission in 1895, was that lack of deer or no deer. Due to colonization and other issues that Pennsylvania was facing at the time. However, they made a roaring comeback for many reasons. If you want to delve into the history of deer management in Pennsylvania, it is long and storied for sure. But they came back with a vengeance, some might say, because these animals are prolific and adaptable. There is nobody in the state right now that has not seen a white-tailed deer in Pennsylvania. Some probably have seen them much closer than they prefer or ever want to, crossing a road or something to that effect. But they are, for a large mammal, they have an incredible reproductive potential. An adult white-tailed deer, female, averages 1.5 fawns per year. Now that's the average. A healthy female is, she's going to give birth to twins every year. And the reason, while it's only once a year that they do this, they are very long-lived animals. So a doe can reproduce every year into 8, 9, 10 years old. They are, like I said, they are very long-lived. And if a deer is not harvested in Pennsylvania, there's not much else that is going to kill them. So we actually have study animals that we have documented. The last one just a couple months ago was 16 years old, a minimum age of 16 years old. So we tagged this animal and she lived another 16 years. And she was finally harvested, which is kind of amazing. A wild animal in Pennsylvania living that long. And they are also very adaptable. They are at home in the woods. They are at home in your yard. They can become habituated to our activities as long as they are not threatened in any way. They will lounge around in your yard like a bunch of cows, and they look tame, but they are not. They're just used to your activity. So this can be a problem, or you can enjoy seeing deer out your window, which many of us do. However, when you see a deer like this, there's not a whole lot of joy seeing a deer getting ready to cross a road in front of your vehicle. So this is a concern, a huge concern, a safety concern for people, and it's pretty unpleasant for the deer as well. I have seen deer hit by a car. People say, oh, I hit a deer, but it ran away, it's fine. It's not fine. The adrenaline that a deer gets from being hit, they usually run off, they usually die later, and sometimes it's not a swift end. So yes, it's a safety concern for people. It's not very humane for deer. And then of course, in these areas or across the state, deer need to eat. It's what they do. And it can cause a lot of damage to landscaping, especially if you're a gardener or enjoy flowers in your yard or anything like that. It can be a real problem because most people don't like their landscaping done by deer. They prefer another method. And it also causes habitat damage, natural habitat damage. There's a trail not very far from McCandless, I think, that is called the Trillium Trail, but there were no trilliums on the trail because the deer had eaten them all. They will eat their, quote, preferred items first and then work their way down the list. But know that a deer's diet, the list of things that it will consume is very long. And most anything and everything is a food item for a deer if that's what is available. So if a deer is hungry enough, it's going to eat it. I don't care if it's on a preferred list or not. And the agency responsible for managing white-tailed deer in Pennsylvania is the Game Commission, of course. We are the state wildlife agency. And we do this by managing hunting opportunity. That's our primary tool. However, we do this at the landscape level. You know, we use wildlife management units. There are 23 wildlife management units in the state of Pennsylvania, and we use those to manage deer across the state. However, we cannot manage deer at the local scale. We just don't have the resources or the personnel to do it. But that means we can't, doesn't mean we can't do anything, but we can't directly solve community deer issues. We will provide technical assistance, which is one of the things that I'm doing here tonight, to help communities and support them as they work through or find solutions to their deer management issues. And we also provide the framework and programs to address those issues as well. Every community is different in their tolerance of what they will stand and what the issues facing that community. Every community is different. So every solution is going to be different. And we as the Game Commission can provide tools and support, but we have no authority to come in and blanket implement any sort of deer management plan or tell you exactly what to do. The community must find out what works best for them. And we have created a lot of resources to help and support communities. So all of these can be found on our website on the deer page and a little section called Living with Whitetails, go figure. The most important of these documents is the Guide to Deer Management in Developed Areas in Pennsylvania and its little companion video. It's a comprehensive guide, steps you through what the process is to try to start addressing the issues that are happening in your community or the conflicts that you're having in your community. McCandless is doing a fabulous job going step by step, because that's what really needs to be done. You need to assess what the problem is, assess what the attitudes are of those living in the community, and advance from there. But I encourage everybody to go look at these resources and understand what they are and what should be done. There's also supporting documents there, like Please Don't Feed the Deer and urban management facts, because there's a whole lot of myths out there about what happens and what doesn't happen with regard to deer. And you really need to understand what the source of that information is and have a trusted source. So I can say this is a trusted source because I created most of this content. So it's correct. But there are also other great resources out there. And this is one I really want to plug. It was put together by Cornell University. It is a website called Community Deer Advisor. There's the little URL at the bottom of the page. This is a comprehensive website on community deer management, all the way from examples to an entire resource library where you can go to look for assistance and frequently asked questions. It is a wonderful, wonderful resource. And I encourage any and all people looking to address deer issues in their community to go here and visit that website. Okay, so as I said, looking at that, how to manage deer in developed areas, the Game Commission can't tell you what to do, but we can support you in that effort. And here's one of that document that I said is kind of like the Bible of the step-by-step process in assessing the situation, because it will help you determine the extent of your deer-human conflicts and define if there really is a problem. Obviously, McCandless has done this work already with that survey. The community has decided that there is a problem. It helps you understand what the management options are available to you as a community. There are many of them. Some of them may work for you, some of them may not work for you. It just depends what the community arrives at for a solution. And it is also important to know that there are many communities that are facing this issue in Pennsylvania and beyond. That's why that Cornell site is so great, because it provides examples from everywhere, up and down the East Coast, from Maine to Florida and west. You know, people are dealing with the same problems. Some of them have developed their own deer management plan already. So I say, don't recreate the wheel. Go to those resources, see what those communities have done, see what has worked for them. Maybe some of that will work for you too. It may not all work, but maybe some of it will. And it's good to see what different components of management plans have been put together. And I often say to everybody I talk to about this issue is you need to define your problem. That is the biggest hurdle that most communities come to. So for example, I talked about deer vehicle collisions. If deer vehicle collisions are a concern in your community, that's your problem that you need to define. It consumes police resources and it's a public safety issue. Yes, that's a problem. And that may be a problem for McCandless Township. Now remember, every community is different. In other communities, deer vehicle collisions may not be a huge concern. So the community itself needs to decide, are deer vehicle collisions the real problem here or something else? And that's what a deer management plan for your community will do. It will help you pinpoint and define those problems that are specific to McCandless or what your community values. Another example of defining the problem may be animal welfare or resident conflicts and complaints, and of course the landscaping issue. You can see this poor deer has got his head stuck in a trick-or-treat bucket. Not a good thing. All these photos were sent to me from Pennsylvania from various places. This poor guy with his head stuck in the trick-or-treat bucket usually prompts a call to us. It usually prompts a call to Kyle or Zeb that need to go out and address this problem because this poor deer can't do it himself. And then you see this other lovely gentleman trying to assist a buck who has got his antlers entangled in a hammock. This was taken outside of Pittsburgh, as a matter of fact. So these are issues. If deer are getting themselves into trouble, if animal welfare seems to be a problem, then that's what you need to define in your plan and how to address those problems. But know that there is no one silver bullet that is going to solve the issues in McCandless Township or anywhere else for that matter. It is a long-term commitment with multiple steps, and it needs to be a multifaceted approach. Not one thing will probably fix your problem, and it's not going to be a one-time solution. It's just like fixing the potholes. You never just fix potholes once and then no need to come back, they're all fixed. Happens, it's ongoing, it becomes part of doing business pretty much, because deer make more deer every year. That is a fact. So I gave you the examples of deer human or resident complaints or animal welfare. So for example, if that is decided that that is a big problem in your community or that's a problem that you want to address, then one of the potential solutions may be to implement a feeding ban in your community. It reduces habituation and deer tolerance of people, which is a good thing. It removes a nutrition source, because remember, the healthier deer is, the more deer they make. So a healthy doe will produce 2 fawns a year and keep producing 2 fawns a year until her end. So that's a lot of deer over potentially 10 to 12 years or longer. It also reduces artificially high concentrations of deer. So deer all moving to one area to feed are going to feed along the way. Remember that. Just because the deer have a supplemental source of food doesn't mean they don't naturally browse. They do that anyway. They just eat more. It changes behavior, meaning it can alter movement patterns, and deer can become more aggressive towards people as well as other deer. And it also has disease implications. Disease implications for the deer themselves, primarily, like metabolic diseases such as rumen acidosis and laminitis. Rumen acidosis is whitetail deer are ruminants and herbivores. So they have a very complex digestive system, which has its own pretty much environment within it. So the microflora and fauna help break down the vegetation, allows deer to get their nutrients. And of course, these nutrients, so the foods that a deer eat, changes seasonally. So they're not eating the same thing in the spring as they do in the summer, as they do in the fall, as they do in the winter. But it's a gradual change. And as this changes seasonally, so does that microenvironment in their rumen. If you introduce something into their diet that they're not used to, that the microflora and fauna are not prepared to digest. A deer, it upsets the acid balance in their rumen, and a deer can die with a full belly. This has happened in Pennsylvania. It's not something that's just talked about. It has been documented here. Laminitis, I don't know if anybody remembers Barberry, but that's the reason he was euthanized, is because of laminitis. It's a result of too much carbohydrates in their diet. It affects the ligaments in their foot. Don't ask me how that all happens. I'm not a veterinarian, I'm just a biologist, but it happens. It's very painful, and it really can't, if Barberry had to be euthanized, you know it's pretty bad, this particular condition. Parasites can be shared at these feed sites, like toxoplasmosis, lungworm, tapeworm, salmonella. Those are all super fun. Prion diseases like chronic wasting disease. Now, chronic wasting disease is not present in Allegheny County that we know of right now, but it is present in other areas of Pennsylvania, and there is no feeding in those areas. And know that if you're feeding a deer, you're not just feeding deer. You're feeding all kinds of other non-target species. I didn't share this photo, but I have a picture of a deer with at least, I think it's at least 12 raccoons all feeding together. People in McCandless and everywhere across the state would be shocked at how many raccoons that you are living with that you have no idea that they are there. So raccoons will come have a snack. So will small rodents like mice and chipmunks and the like. If you have mice and chipmunks there, you're also going to bring in other critters like fox and coyote that eat small mammals. Those critters also carry things like rabies, distemper, parvo, and Lyme. And this is where I mentioned Lyme disease. And deer are not a huge factor in Lyme. They are dead-end hosts, and they don't infect ticks with the spirochete, but those small mammals do. So if you have small mammals, which everybody does, there's a whole bunch of mice running around there that you don't know of either. They are being supported by that feeding. Again, it contributes to a whole different host of issues that could be happening in the community beyond just feeding deer. Another example of a management action is hunting. Now, on a statewide level, this is how the Game Commission manages deer. We manage across the entire state. Like I said, those 23 management units, it's a big job. We do it with hunters. Removing some deer within the community could address problems like deer vehicle collisions and damage to landscaping. Fewer deer means fewer opportunities for those collisions and fewer mouths to feed. Hunting is one way to do this. Now, the Game Commission manages deer by managing hunting opportunities. So we, every year, as an agency, we set allocations at that unit level to harvest a certain number of antlerless deer to control those populations. Communities can do the same thing. Managed hunts is what they're normally called in these areas. Allow hunting within the Game Commission regulations. So the Game Commission provides the umbrella regulations but that doesn't mean that communities can't be more restrictive. And here are some examples of those. Communities are more restrictive, like in Chester County Parks, in Upper Makefield Township in Bucks County, and even in Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, which is pretty close to you. They all have some kind of managed hunts that put more restrictions as opposed to just open hunting or what we allow to address their deer issues in their community. Now, community deer management needs to be multifaceted. Like I said, not one thing is going to solve a problem, but many things can contribute to a solution. And managed hunts may support community deer management goals, but know that they might not be enough. You may have to do more. Just like I said, one thing may not be enough to address all the issues that your community is experiencing. And I say this to everybody I talk to with regard to community deer management, is that many communities get hung up on the actual number of deer in the area. And remember that deer problems are not defined by the number of deer, they're defined by the impact of those deer. The impact of those deer and the values of the residents in that area. So knowing the number of deer will not reduce the number of deer vehicle collisions or increase the natural diversity of your parks. Trends are what is important. So if your goal is to reduce deer vehicle collisions, you've met that goal when you have fewer deer vehicle collisions, not when you have a specific number of deer in your community. The number of deer may be linked, of course, to deer vehicle collisions, but you don't need one to achieve the other. Resources spent on estimating the deer population and haggling over what is too many or too few could be better spent on other aspects of the deer management plan in your community. So, and even if deer numbers are ecologically balanced, your community still may be experiencing too high levels of impact from deer, because that is what defines your problem. The community defines what the problems are, not the number of deer. So successful deer management is based on community defined goals, not a number. And with that, I am done. I don't know if we're saving questions till the very end. So
Yes.
I will pass it off to whoever's next.
Thank you, Jeannine. Thank you very much. We are going to take questions at the end after the 3 different presentations. So if you'll hang on to those questions, remember to put them in the chat box. Next, we're going to hear from Ken Allshouse. Ken is a member of the McCandless Environmental Advisory Committee. He's a lifelong resident of McCandless. He has a bachelor's degree in forest science from Penn State, a master's in forest products. He's a past board member of the American Chestnut Foundation. Those are the old chestnut trees. Some of the older folks will remember those. Ken is instrumental in trying to bring them back. He's an appointed member of the Friends of North Park, and he owns and manages forest properties. So what he's going to get into is some of the impact, the ecological impact that the excess deer population cause in our community, not just your tulips and azaleas in your backyard, but on a broader scale. So Ken, if you're ready, take it away.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was a lot of information that Janine provided, and some of that is similar to what I'm going to be talking about. You know, we all love to see those deer until they're in front of the hood of our car. And in McCandless Township, that happens about 200 times a year, and about half of those, the police officer has to come out and take care of it. And the township has to pick up after the deer so that they're not left on the side of the road. We all love to watch the 2 fawns frolicking in our backyard until we realize that the mom just ate most of our garden and the flowers that we just planted. And then we get a little bit irritated with the deer and we see the damage that they do to our shrubs in the winter. But that same damage is going on in the woods. And with the deer, they consume about 10 pounds of browse each day. Depending on the year, you know, a pregnant doe is going to consume more and so forth. But on average, about 10 pounds of herbaceous growth in a given day. So when you realize what the damage they do in your backyard, that's also going on in the woods. And why is that bad? The reason that that's a big concern to me is that growing up here, when I was a child, I could go and pick blackberries. And the deer have eaten all the blackberry bushes. That's actually in forestry, when we log an area, that's one of the ways we know if we're going to have successful regeneration, is when the blackberry bushes grow up, we know that we'll have successful regeneration. And so we don't have blackberries anymore. We don't have oak trees or any other small trees in the understory. I can look from my backyard and see neighbors that are several hundred yards away through the woods because the deer have cleared everything out. That's not natural. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And when those big old oak trees that fall down in North Park and all through the North Hills, many of our red oak trees are 100, 150 years old now. And so when we get storms, they naturally fall down. That's their life expectancy. And there's nothing there to replace them because the deer have browsed all of the small trees. And so what are we going to leave behind? Well, when that oak tree falls, it makes sun be able to get down to the forest floor. There's no small trees to get there. And so what happens is we get the invasive species that the deer won't eat. We get the Japanese barberry. You can see whole hillsides in the North Hills area that are just Japanese barberry. And that happens to be where the tick larvae tend to hang out, is in the Japanese barberry. The easy way to find the Japanese barberries, it'll be the first thing that greens up in the spring. Before anything else greens up, you'll see some green down in the close to the ground there, and that's the Japanese barberry. We also have a new invasive that is really concerning, and that's Japanese stilt grass. And again, when that tree falls down and it opens up, it's a perfect place for that stilt grass to grow. And it grows over top, and it actually smothers out the small trees that may be there, and it smothers out the fern and any of the other plants. It just takes over the site, and nothing really consumes it. It just is there and takes over the site. So why, rather than just aesthetics, what else is going on? When we don't have those herbaceous plants in the understory, we don't have the flowers, we don't have the seeds, and so we have fewer songbirds. So when there's too many deer, it affects the whole ecosystem. We have fewer songbirds, fewer chipmunks and squirrels because they don't have cover, they don't have food sources. And because there's no cover, it also makes it easier for the hawks and owls to prey on those small rodents and birds because they have no cover to shield them. So it affects the whole ecosystem. If you go to an area where there's been hunting, where the deer population is down, you'll find a lot of things like we have a lot of different wildflowers that we no longer see. The Joe Pye bush is one that when I was a kid, I used to dry like bamboo, and we would play with them and use those for like spears and things like that. And it's a very pretty flower, but you don't see it anymore because the deer eat it. We have wild geraniums. You don't find them anymore. I have areas around my house that I've fenced in that I have some of these native plants still growing there. But out in the woods in North Park or in Wall Park or Potter Park in McCandless, you won't find any of those things because the deer have consumed them. We used to have deciduous azaleas that were native to this area. And again, they're all gone because the deer have browsed them. So what are we going to leave to our progeny? We're going to leave a bunch of invasive species, barberry, stiltgrass, bittersweet vine, things that aren't native to this area and really aren't very nice to look at. And because we no longer have the trees in the understory because of the excess browsing of the deer, we don't have the cover, the seeds, the flowers from all of our native wild plants. So it affects the whole ecosystem when we have too many deer for the area. So I'm an advocate for, if you decide to allow hunting on your property, and many landowners on both sides of me allow people to hunt, but the guys that are hunting there are all after that big buck. And so I still have the same does bedded down in my backyard that have been there all summer because no one's shooting those mature does, which are what we need to harvest really to control the population. So from my perspective, I love to see deer. I just wish that we had fewer of them, that we could have a more natural and sustainable environment that we no longer have. So the excess deer population causes really a big ecological devastation for all of the other creatures in the woods. And that's something that we are seeking to alleviate so that we do start to have more natural forest cover and wild plants in the understory. And that's really all I have. I thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Ken. And again, questions later after this next presentation. Our third presentation, the last presentation of tonight, is from two of our state game wardens. Madison Kyle is originally from Beaver County and attended the community college in Beaver County studying biological science. Ms. Kyle also studied wildlife biology at Edinburgh University and ultimately was accepted to the Ross Leffler School of Conservation in Harrisburg. And I didn't know it, but I looked it up and found out that the Ross Leffler School is the training academy for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, has been since 1932. Ms. Kyle graduated the academy in 2019, was initially assigned to Northern Mercer County. She transferred to Northern Allegheny County this year. In her capacity as state game warden, Ms. Kyle handles a wide variety of assignments, including animal complaints, hunter education, and general law enforcement. She is also a principal source of Game Commission information to various clubs, schools, and organizations, and thus one of the reasons we invited her to speak tonight. Joining her is Zeb Campbell. Zeb Campbell, also a state game warden, has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice science from Penn State and is 3 years as a state game warden. We're glad to have Mr. Campbell because he has experience in this subject in that he assisted both Ross Township and Franklin Park when they were developing their own deer programs. So his comments should be both pertinent and insightful tonight. So if you're both ready, Madison and Zeb, take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Good evening, everyone. Like Dan said, I'm Officer Kyle with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Recently, I actually just transferred to the Allegheny County. My first week or my first day was last week. So I'm relatively new to the area, still learning my way around. However, I just wanted to take the opportunity to speak to you guys this evening and kind of give you the input of what we see as state game wardens in the field. So what do we do? Dan's already touched on it. We're in charge of I&E as far as information education programs, which is why we're involved with this program tonight. We're also involved in the law enforcement aspect of the Game Commission. We're involved with surveys and studies, turkey trapping, various things the Game Commission does. We contribute to the Game Commission in much more capacity than just law enforcement, even though that is our main focus. And like Dan said, we went to Ross Leffler School of Conservation for a year to be state game warden. So on that note, who are we in relation to a deer management program? So what do we do? So the state game wardens are more of a liaison between the commission and the township that's implementing any sort of program. So what we do is we assist the township in deciding what management programs work best for them based on knowledge and experience in the field and of course fellow officers. So what Zeb or Officer Campbell and I do is we enforce the laws and the regulations associated with hunting and trapping in the state of Pennsylvania. So our main focus as far as a deer management program would be is to making sure that all the laws and the regulations are followed in that management program. And of course, everybody does it in a safe and lawful manner. Now, we often interact with the public and deer and human conflicts, and that's because a lot of the calls that come in to the regional office come to the officers, and then we respond accordingly. For instance, today I dispatched 2 injured deer. Both had been injured by vehicles. That's something we do very regularly, is dispatch injured wildlife. Now, neither of those deer were in McCandless Township. One was in Hampton and one was in Penn Hills. However, that's in very close proximity to where you guys are, as in it's all Allegheny County, and it's relatively close. And it's similar to what you're experiencing as far as a lot of vehicle collisions involving deer in McCandless Township. So based on our experiences, we've had a lot of deer human conflicts. and have seen the pros and cons of what works and what doesn't, and what can be implemented and what doesn't work quite as well. So based on that program, and should McCandless Township choose to do a program, the township would pretty much manage their own program should they implement one. Officer Campbell and I and all the wardens of Pennsylvania are simply there to make sure the rules and the regulations are followed, and they're followed in accordance to the law as far as the safety aspect of it and all things considered. We would be there to assist in the leadership of McCandless as to make sure that everything runs accordingly and smoothly, and everything is set up with accordance with the law and working well. That being said, Dan has already made mention of the fact that Zeb had already worked with 2 other townships in implementing a deer management program. Zeb has also been covering this township for several months as it was open. I hadn't had the opportunity to transfer yet. So at this time, I'd like to pass the mic over to Zeb and let him share some input as what he's seen as far as McCandless Township and the associated townships.
Thank you, Madison. Hello, everybody. I'm State Game Warden Campbell, and I have covered the area for the last couple months. I did assist Ross Township with getting their deer management program on the road and moving, and they had a very great year this last year doing it. As Janine said, we're looking for a management process for McCandless. What will work for McCandless? What will work for your community? And that's what we look for when we're doing a program like this. Myself and Officer Kyle will be here for the whole part of it because we'll be working with all the leadership, helping them out while we're doing this. Some of the things I have seen over the last about year I've been covering the area. One that really sticks out, there was a car accident that the deer actually ripped the hood off of the car and landed in the back seat of the car after the accident. So it's not just an accident that might just injure a deer and cause body work to a car. It could also cause injuries to people too. That's why Franklin Park started theirs, is due to a accident where a deer actually killed a person from the car accident. The other thing I want you guys to remember, there's many ways that we can manage deer, but the most cheap and effective way to do it is to have hunting come in. I know a lot of the questions might be, why can't we bring in sharpshooter hunters? Well, one of the factions for having the sharpshooter people come in is first you have to have legal hunting in there, and we have to have the CID numbers before we can make that permit possible for that community like they do in Mount Lebanon. I always say, why don't we start with hunters, because it's going to cost the township absolutely nothing. Franklin Park, Ross Township, Moon Township, North Park all have hunters that go out into the woods every year. Many of them pay extra money to have extra insurance, and there's a whole bunch of regulations that the townships or the parks have to help out with that. And if you guys decide to go that way, we'll be here to help you with that and see which way works best for you. But this is foremost for your guys' information to see which way you want to go with managing your deer population in your area. As I said before, we have a couple in the area already doing it, and the more that we get on board to manage the deer in the area, it will help out with the whole area, not just McCandless, but the whole North Hills and around Pittsburgh. Another thing I'd like to really bring up is feeding deer. I think that should be the very first thing that you guys try to pass to stop feeding deer. You guys can make a town ordinance to stop people feeding deer, and that will go through your guys' township. It is not a state law, so the state game warden cannot come out and enforce a town ordinance. You'd have to have an ordinance officer, which should be the same person that goes out there for if your grass is too high or anything like that going on in your township. Ross Township did that first, and it helped out a lot. I'm a real advocate of that through all of Allegheny County, because that is, I'd say, the biggest part of our deer to human conflict is people feeding deer and it causing issues with the neighbors. I actually had a call today where the neighbor feeds deer and the deer come through the gentleman's backyard so frequently and eat all his shrubs and stuff that he got tired of them being there and actually shot one with a pellet gun, not hurting it bad enough to do any damage to the deer, but enough to cause concern to the neighbor. So then I had to come out there and talk to the neighbor and talk to the gentleman who shot the deer with a pellet gun. The other thing is when you bring deer, like Janine said, all in one area, you're bringing the diseases there, and it changes the behavior of the deer. Since I've been here, I've actually had deer that have attacked dogs because they've had fawns near these areas, and the neighbor's dog was out there, and the natural instinct of that doe is to defend its offspring and attack that dog. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was over $300 worth of vet bills just for that dog from that deer. So that's what I always recommend first, is to do a feeding ban. The feeding ban will also help if you guys decide to go for a managed hunt, because one of the things when you're hunting deer in Pennsylvania is you can't hunt them through the use of bait. And say that your neighbor has corn out feeding the deer, you can't have a tree stand close to that area to hunt the deer. And that could be a way to cause issues on both sides of the road. And we actually ran into that in McCandless, or not McCandless, in Ross, excuse me. And I worked with the township ordinance officer. They got the people to stop feeding the deer, and I had the gentleman stop hunting the deer until they were past their 30-day window, so that everyone's doing it fair and equitable. Other thing is we're all about safety. That will be our number one concern on any of these programs, is making sure that it is a safe area for people to hunt, and everything else that would be entitled with that. And we'd help the township with that and help them point them in the correct way. Plus, we're also going to patrol the areas, because we always do. We're always going to be in the area. I just hope everyone understands that for the whole county of Allegheny, there's only 3 full-time game wardens. So we are from everywhere. I know that I cover now from Ross Township all the way to the Beaver County line, down to Bridgeville. Madison has the middle part of Allegheny County, from Westmoreland County and Butler County up to mine. And then there's one other gentleman that has the I'd say the southeast side of Allegheny County. So if you do have concerns or issues, I hope you guys can realize that we'll get there as quick as we possibly can, but we cover a big area. So we might be an hour away when we get the call that we have to try getting to you, or we might even have something else that's more safety oriented that we have to deal with before we head your way. Other than that, I'm really pleased with McCandless. They're doing the same steps as a lot of the other townships did, getting information out there and seeing what the community wants. I just want to let the community know that we'll be here to help with working with McCandless throughout the steps, no matter which way the decision goes. Thank you.
Thanks, Zeb. Appreciate that. Same to you, Madison. Appreciate you both participating. At this point, we're going to turn it over to Katie Coleman. Katie is the Northland Public Library coordinator, if you will, for this entire program. And she has been taking questions in the chat box and will now start responding. She'll bring up the question, and then whoever appropriately needs to respond will try to do so. Katie, it's all yours.
Thank you. I will try and direct it to some of them. You know, it's easy to direct. So the first one, I'm going to throw your way, Janine. And if it's not quite your area, we can always, I'll let you point at that. But our first question was, has the uptick in deer population brought in more predator species like coyote in recent years?
Absolutely not. It's coyotes and the predator suite of Pennsylvania is pretty stable. We have wonderful black bear population in Pennsylvania, up through the middle of the state, pretty much, bobcats as well. People automatically think of coyotes, and I'm just gonna put it right out there. I love coyotes. They're like one of my favorite critters because you can't keep them down. They are fabulous. However, coyotes get a really bad rap for a lot of reasons. Coyotes are pretty much, they focus on small things. It's very, very rare that a coyote will take down an adult deer. Of all the deer we have tagged and followed over the years, and when I say all the deer, I'm talking about well over 1,000 animals. Maybe a handful, and when I say a handful, I mean like a handful of adult animals have been killed by a coyote. Now they, of course, all of our predators eat fawns because fawns are little and cute and easy to catch. So, but there are not any more or less predators in Allegheny County because of the deer. It's just the natural way of things are.
Thank you, Jeannine. So we are getting a number of questions about, specifically about the process with controlled hunting. So I'm gonna sort of, if someone had a specific question about that I don't get to, just know that I'm kind of trying to get them sort of grouped together a little more broadly. And then if we have ones that are super specific to the McCandless area, we'll send those along afterward so that maybe we can get a like quick paragraph or something answered on like specifically McCandless that I can send out with the email along with the recording for everyone. But I don't want us to get bogged down in very specific details with a possibility of controlled hunting in McCandless tonight. So kind of broadly, to try and get some of these questions answered though, a lot of people are wondering how successful was the culling in Ross Township, and how kind of quickly would it be to get something like that together and get it implemented?
So I'll take that one. So the Ross Township was very successful this year. Trying to think of the numbers offhand. I can't tell you the numbers right offhand. I believe I just got the report the other day and just glanced over it real quick. But as Jeannine said, it is all about what the community wants for how many deer are in the area. And that's what we're looking at. So Ross Township is in its first stage of the managed deer hunts because it just started last year, where Franklin Park and North Park have been doing it for many years. I know I went to the Franklin Park meeting and it seems like they're getting to a plateau. But at the same point, when you get to a plateau, you still need to keep hunters there because deer can reproduce real quick. And we want to make sure that we keep a handle on it and don't let it get out of turn. So for Ross Township, they actually started the process, and Jeannine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I believe you came to the first meeting for that. I believe it's been 5 years that they started the process before they started hunting.
Oh my goodness, I think Ross Township, I want to say, Zeb, it goes back even further than that. Ross Township has been trying to get a deer management program or plan in place probably for close to the same amount of time I've been in Pennsylvania. It just goes to show you how some communities struggle to reach that point. I'm so happy to hear that Ross Township has finally started to gain ground as a community to manage their deer. But know that, you know, it can fail or falter if you're not focused on the community needs. But for sure, Ross Township has been struggling with this for a long time. And, you know, if you put that in perspective with, say, Fox Chapel, who has had a deer management program in place for decades, very successful up there, you know, in addressing their deer concerns. So again, I can't reiterate this enough, that each community is different. And you need to focus on what is good for McCandless Township. Now, and again, look to your neighbors to see, because sometimes you don't really want to emulate some of that stuff. I don't know if anybody followed the papers with Mount Lebanon probably more than a few years ago now. They made the news and it wasn't all good. Thankfully, they've gotten past that and they have a deer management program in place now that is working for them. So again, use that as an example to get to where you need to get. And if a managed hunt, whatever that looks like for your community, it may not look the same as it does in Ross Township or Fox Chapel or Mount Lebanon. It might not look exactly the same, but it may still work for you. And, you know, Zeb and Madison are here to help with that.
If I can just interject real quickly too, with North Park, the controlled hunt there with whitetail hunters has been going on for over 20 years. And this last year in North Park, which would be in McCandless, Hampton, Pine Townships, they harvested 127 deer during the hunting seasons this year.
And with the 2 fawn production rate, you can realize that that's 3 times that many next year. Both the doe that was counted in that 127 and the 2 fawns that don't get produced. So that's a big impact.
So we have a couple of questions about this. Beyond, besides just a controlled hunt, what other options are there available? A couple of people have specifically asked about birth control and trapping deer.
Well, first of all, with regard to trapping, there is no place to bring these deer. Pennsylvania has deer where there should be deer, and we control that via, you know, wildlife management units. So there is no place devoid of deer in Pennsylvania that is looking for more deer. And the other thing with regard to trapping is you do not just move the deer. Deer are little biohazard packages. You move all the parasites, all the bacteria, all the diseases that deer carries with it. And we don't want to introduce something into an area that doesn't have it already. So trapping and transferring deer to another area is just something the Game Commission will not consider for a host of reasons. With regard to birth control or fertility control with deer, it's something that is very site specific. I'm not going to say it can't work. I'm not going to say it doesn't work, because there are some studies that show that it does. However, it is extremely labor intensive. It is extremely expensive. And right now, those methods aren't approved in Pennsylvania, either chemically or sterilization wise. So you have to also remember that none of these things, when you handle a wild animal, none of these are stress-free. An animal, we trap deer for research purposes. We do it as quickly as possible because that causes stress to an animal. Just handling a wild animal, you're putting it at risk of death because of the stress that it's under. So if you think about that with regard to fertility control, there is no method that is not a hands-on method. There is no remote delivery of any kind of drug right now that is approved. And if you want to sterilize deer, you're talking about an operational procedure on a wild animal. So these are very complex and site-specific, and usually they cannot happen, or they're not successful on their own, because you have to remember, if you stop fertility control, you're not removing any deer from the area. You're just potentially flattening it. So you're still going to have all those deer that need to be fed, that can be hit by a car, all these other things. And you need to actually, when you want to stop that growth, you need to treat upwards of 90% of the females in the population. That is exceptionally difficult to do.
Helps if I unmute. We have a lot of questions sort of about the actual process with the controlled hunt. So forgive me if I'm simplifying any of your questions, but I'll kind of group them together in probably Zeb would be the best person to answer this, but what weapons would be allowed and what would it follow kind of normal hunting rules? A couple of people have asked about the areas, like you're not allowed to hunt within so many feet or within certain areas. Would that still be the case in a controlled hunt, or would those be a little looser during that?
So yeah, the safety zone is still going to apply at 50 yards towards any dwelling that has someone inside of it. But also to remember, if you have permission to hunt in that person's safety zone, you're allowed to hunt in that safety zone. Now we'd have to look at, see what kind of properties there are in McCandless and see how big they are. I know Ross Township, and I'm just saying Ross Township because that is fresh in my brain from last year. They decided they wanted archery equipment only. So that's what they went with, and it seems to work better in these smaller woodlots where you're going to have the deer at, where you could do it a safe way, where you're not going to have an issue of someone shooting a gun, and safety wise with safety zones and everything else. And that would be another meeting. Like I believe right now we're still looking to see which way McCandless wants to go. If they decide that they're going to go with the managed hunts, then we're going to have another meeting where we sit down and McCandless is going to figure out which way they want to go. There's many different ways, as Janine said. I know Ross, their first deer, and I know for the North Park, their first deer all have to be antlerless deer. And I know for Ross that their first deer goes to Hunters Sharing the Harvest, and their third deer goes to Hunters Sharing the Harvest. There's many ways that we can do this, many different ways that McCandless can have it set up. I always recommend the first deer being an antlerless deer as a doe, because you're going to take care of more of the population control, and that's what we're looking at. We don't need guys to come in, as Ken said, and just be hunting for that one big buck in the area. We really need guys to come in there and help control the population is what we're looking at.
And during that, who gets to keep the meat? And then there's another question. Sorry, people keep typing and then I lose my questions.
No problem.
So do a large percentage of Pennsylvania municipalities controlled hunts require venison donations?
Like I said, that's up to the actual municipality, what they put in their rules, that they can say, we're going to have this hunt on our properties. But the first one and the third one have to go to Hunters Sharing the Harvest, which is an organization that takes meat to people of need. And it works very well. Like a lot of our deer that we take that can be still used go to that area to help out. And then if it doesn't go to there, say it's the second deer, most hunters enjoy deer meat. That's a lot of the reasons why they hunt, and it's going to be consumed by them. Another thing I always say to that is if a hunter is harvesting that deer, it's better than A, getting hit by a car and causing damage to that car, but B, the resource is actually going to be used and not just go to waste on the side of the road. So that's another reason why I think that an archer hunt would help out. But like I said, it's up to the residents and McCandless to figure out which way they want to go.
Just as a quick point with the county 9 parks, they have the controlled hunt in each of the parks. And I believe last year they donated over 3,000 pounds of meat to the different food banks from the different deer that were harvested in the different parks.
Thank you, Ken. That's great. Ken, I actually have a question for you. We have dozens of deer daily that migrate through our property. They eat flowers, bushes, ground cover, low-lying tree branches, etc. Any recommendations for avoiding this situation?
The only way you keep deer from eating something is for them not to be able to get at it, and that's wire. I have a couple of different areas on my property where I've taken like 50 feet of 4-foot wire and I make it a narrow circle because a deer can stand next to a 4-foot fence and jump over it. So I have to make it that they don't feel comfortable jumping over it into it. And that's where I have like the wild geraniums and Solomon seal and all of those plants that used to be here. I have growing in those enclosures. But the only way you can really protect your plants is to have a physical barrier, a wire fence to protect them. You can spray them, but it's like every time it rains, you have to respray. And in some cases, after a period of time, they don't seem to care that you've put rotten eggs on them or hot pepper juice or whatever. Over time, they decide, I'm going to eat it anyway. So it's a tough thing when they're hungry. I've watched them eat poison ivy leaves, right? If they're hungry, they eat.
So with people putting out bird seed for birds, if it's in a bird feeder or something high enough, is that a good enough solution, or will deer still try to get to that as well?
I haven't seen them get up and knock off a bird feeder. I'm not sure if somebody else may have experienced that. Just touching on the feeding and baiting for deer with hunters. One of my neighbors a few years ago was feeding deer every day at 4 o'clock. And the church behind Ingomar Road, there's guys that archery hunt. And on the other side of my house, guys archery hunt. Well, they made those deer very predictable. And so the person was trying to feed the deer and be nice, so to speak. And the hunters thought it was great. So it's one of those things of need to have balance on what we're doing on things. And feeding the deer is like right now, if you with the deer being in late winter, if you put corn out there, as Janine was talking about, chances are that deer's got a good chance of going back up into the woods and actually dying with a full stomach because its system just is not ready to handle that. I'm good.
As far as the bird feeder, I have seen deer go out and hit bird feeders to get the seed out and eat the bird seed that comes out of the bird feeder.
I'm not surprised by that. So I have a complicated question, probably for you, Janine. So McKnight Road is a state road, and I'm sure most people who hit deer on McKnight are not township residents. Why is this not a state responsibility? Why are deer problems a township responsibility and not the state's?
They are the state responsibility. As I said, as the state wildlife agency, we manage deer across the state. What we can't manage is localized problems, just because we just don't have the resources to do it. There are 600 employees in the entire Game Commission, and that covers everything from wildlife law enforcement officers to biologists to support staff to food and cover workers. It's just an impossible task. So yes, it is the Game Commission's responsibility, but we can't manage those localized problems. State roads, PennDOT picks up those unfortunate souls that don't make it to the other side. But as you said, they're not just McCandless Township residents, but they are residents of Pennsylvania mostly. And we just all need to do our part. And the other thing is while Game Commission umbrella or state management works well in certain areas, that management can't necessarily be or doesn't work as well in these more developed areas. So we cannot, as the Game Commission, force people to allow hunting on their property or within their safety zone. So those residents need to come together to find a solution within that to address those problems.
Thank you. We have a couple of different questions along these lines, which I think is a really good one, and one that I have as well, as I am in a different municipality. So with, like, say, Ross having a controlled hunt and having a plan in place, does that affect the surrounding, municipalities that may not have a plan? Are we seeing more, is that fixing it in one municipality, causing the deer to go to another? And are we seeing transient deer coming from like other communities, into McCandless and then out of McCandless if they start dealing with it? I don't know the best person to answer that. Maybe you, Zeb.
I'll jump in on it quickly in that I'm a trail runner and in North Park, they don't hunt the deer during the rifle season because they would have to wear orange. But people in McCandless are hunting the deer at that time. And so the trails back by the golf course, I don't see deer there frequently when the hunters are in North Park. But as soon as deer season starts, rifle season starts, there'll be 40, 50 deer on the back nine. I mean, literally, I've stopped and counted more than 40 deer on that little par 3 on the back nine. So deer move away from pressure. So when that hunt is going on in North Park, the deer just move over into McCandless. And when they're hunting in McCandless, they just move over into the park. So it's one of those things that deer don't move miles. They'll move a mile or two, but they do move away from pressure. So that's why it's important to, if possible, to have all these hunts going on at the same time so the deer can't just move away to an area where there is no pressure on them.
Have we seen any, I don't know if you would even be looking for this, but is there any evidence of, one community or one municipality putting a plan in place and neighboring ones seeing an uptick in their deer issues?
I don't think it's necessarily an uptick because deer don't see boundaries. They don't see political boundaries. They don't care if it's McCandless or Ross or Franklin Park. A deer's home range is a deer's home range. And in these areas, I mean, the rule of thumb is usually a square mile is a deer home range. That's 620 acres. Most of us, especially who live in a town or a suburb, can't even fathom what 620 acres look like because we all live on half-acre lots. Usually deer in these areas have a slightly smaller home range than that, but know that deer, as Ken said, they're fluid and they move about in their home range. So if one township has a deer management program, think of it more like a heat map. So there may be a red glowing spot. We'll just use McCandless as an example because you don't have a deer management program right now. And that may ebb and flow as it goes into Ross. So it may not be as glowing hot in those areas, but they're still going to have it because, like I said, deer move across the landscape. And deer who have lived through a hunting season or just in your communities in general, regardless of hunting, they know where the safe places are and they know when to go there. It is amazing. We have deer that are collared in hunted areas, and before gun season starts after Thanksgiving, they've already moved to their safe place. Before the first shot even goes off, they know. So don't think that these animals are at a disadvantage. They have it all over us. We are trying to play catch up to them every step of the way. But know that deer don't move into another area and say, I'm never going back to McCandless. They have their home range and they just move into those safe places.
Thank you, Janine. We've been getting a couple of different questions along these lines. So when it comes to culling, why, sort of back to the birth control issue of, birth controlling, why are we not making sure just to take out bucks, and the does would then, wouldn't have to worry about having more fawns?
Are you saying we should remove males instead of females? If that's the question, I'm going to tell you right now, it only takes one boy, and that's it. Deer are not monogamous, and they, for years in Pennsylvania as a deer management program, before we implemented antler point restrictions back around 2000 or so, 2002, that little time frame there. Before we did that, every year we removed 80% of the antler deer population, 80% every year. That's not what the harvest was, that's the actual. So we were left with very, very few males on the landscape. But you know what happens? Every year a female has more fawns, and she has boys. And so those boys are replenished every year, and they can breed at a year old or a year and a half, because the deer's breeding season is in the fall. So that at year and a half old, all those fawns that were from the year before are now breeding, and there's plenty of them to go around. Males are not our problem.
So that might have also answered this question, but is there any merit to the idea of loosening antler restrictions in urban areas to help promote population management?
I would say no, because we need antlerless deer killed. It doesn't matter the size of the male. You need to encourage people to remove antlerless deer if you want to have an effect on the population. Really, that's the bottom line. You can fill around with antler point restrictions all you want. It's those antlerless deer you need to remove to have an effect on the population.
The one other thing I'll throw in there is that when you have an awful lot of does and just one buck, he doesn't get all of them the first time they come into season. And so you have some of the fawns being born very late in the year. And like I have one fawn at my house here that probably weighs about 40 pounds. That's awful rough for it to make it through this winter. And it's never going to grow up as big as the other deer because of that. So when you get that buck-doe ratio out of whack, the fawns are born over a longer period of time during the spring.
Okay, we are at 8:30, so we wanted to, again, be very mindful of everyone's time. So we had a lot of really great questions, and a lot of them I know we didn't get to specifically, or that were a little more nuanced than what I asked, to try and sort of make them a little more broad. So just know we will be passing along everyone's questions and hopefully try to get some answers out to everyone about those more specifics, especially the ones that were very specific to McCandless and the possibility of a controlled hunt in McCandless and what that might look like. So last question for the evening, I'd like each of you to take in turn and give a quick answer, if you have one, that for everyone attending, we can talk about the controlled hunt and everything, but what is the one thing that each person attending individually can start trying to do to help with managing the deer population?
I guess I'll start, and I'll say that the first thing is to don't feed them. That concentrates them, and try to let them disperse through their range.
I'll go second, and I'll echo that non-feeding. And then I'll also mention that everyone should, and I hope they will, keep track of what it is we are trying to do here in McCandless, and be a participant, and give us your opinion and your thoughts and your comments. And I said I would repeat this at the end, and I'm going to. If you do have specific questions concerning specifically McCandless, you can address them to EAC, that stands for Environmental Advisory Committee, EAC at townofmccandless.org. So that they will take questions in the next few days or week if you haven't gotten around to doing it tonight.
I guess I'll go next. I would echo the whole no feeding thing. And I love deer. Trust me, I work with them every single day. I would also encourage people to get educated on what is out there and what is feasible, and understand what the different options are and how they may be applied. And think of it in your context. Deer biology is complex. Ecosystem management is complex. All these things are all intertwined together. And it can be pretty big task to try to grasp it all. But go visit that Cornell website to understand what can be done, what has been done, what has worked, and know that, you know, taking steps to manage deer in your community doesn't mean you love deer any less, for sure.
Just to go off what Janine said and what everybody else said, I would encourage the restriction of feeding. Also encourage you all to, I'm sure many of you feed the deer and you see the same deer every day, and you start to build like an emotional attachment to that deer. Try to remember, try to see the broad picture that these are wild animals. It's wildlife. It is not a pet. They're not domesticated. A lot of people see as hunting as malicious, as just a very mean thing that, you know, hunters come in and they kill your pets, so to speak, you know, the doe and the fawns that come and visit every day. But I just encourage you to see the big picture that, you know, hunters aren't here to kill all the deer. That's not the point. It's for conservation. It's for to protect the resource for generations to come, means conserving the resource now. That way it can be strong for many, many years to come. You know, if we have a large population of deer and they're just eating and eating and eating, they're going to run out of food, and starving is more inhumane and a terrible end than an honest hunter that would make it, you know, the most appropriate means necessary. I just encourage you all to see the big picture. Don't reference Bambi when it comes to hunting and sportsmen. It's certainly not like that. But, you know, if Zeb or I can ask any or answer any more questions, help in the law enforcement as far as safety aspect, we'd be happy to do so. We're certainly not encouraging people to come and, you know, sit in your backyard and shoot the deer that you've grown to enjoy. But like I said, build more towards a conservation aspect of it so you can keep that good deer population for generations to come.
I have to say that I agree with everything everyone else has said. And the other thing I'd like to say is, I know we're looking just at McCandless right now, but look at the whole North Hills as a community. As Janine said, the deer are moving through the whole North Hills. So the more that we can get to help not just our own communities, but neighboring communities, we could help with the issue of the overpopulation of deer in all of North Hills. But definitely feeding is my number one thing. That's a big thing. And what Officer Kyle said with hunting, it is a really great tool that can be used in the correct way. And I want everyone to think of it this way. Even without this program being out there right now, I guarantee there's people that are hunting in McCandless this last year. And a lot of the people that have joined the program, like Ross and the North Park, all those other places, they call us when they see something going wrong. So they're advocates for us too. So I want to keep that in the back of everyone's mind. But just remember, we're trying to do this for the whole community, not just for McCandless, but for all of the North Hills. And I thank you for everyone coming tonight.
Edie?
Thank you to all our presenters. Dan, any last parting words for everyone?
No, I think it's up to you. Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone for coming, and thank you again for all of your questions. Do not worry, I will be saving the chat log so we can get some of those questions answered for you and try to get you an answer. And I think that's it. Thank you again to everyone for presenting. Thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you.